it's hard to have an exhilarating conversation about obscure federal regulations, but maybe this will catch your attention. Recent changes afoot at the Federal Communications Commission are likely to have a profound impact on the news that you and a vast majority, or some of us, Americans consume. While most of Washington seems mired in gridlock, the FCC has moved at light speed, cutting away at decades-old rules that fostered local programming, diversity, and competition. Just this week, the commission dropped something called the main studio rule.
The main studio rule required that television, AM and FM stations keep a studio in or near the local communities that receive their broadcasts.
That rule was intended to ensure local accountability. Next to go might be cross-ownership, rules preventing broadcasters from owning newspapers in the same market, the one that forced Rupert Murdoch to sell the Boston Herald to buy Fox 25. Now, FCC Chairman Ajit Pai says he's just moving with the times.
We set rules of the road that reflect the marketplace of today, as opposed to the marketplace in 1975 or 1997.
Pai says the need to ensure competition is no longer needed in the Internet era, and he may go further, lifting caps on how many stations a single company can own. That comes as Sinclair Broadcast Group seeks to buy Tribune Media, a deal critics say will create a conservative media behemoth.
It marries that influence, that size, reaching into 40% of households right now, with a unabashed conservative and pro-Trump agenda.
The prospect of that ought to create some static. So I don't have a knee-jerk negative reaction to this. I mean, I think it's too bad about the home studio rule. And I think limiting the number of stations you own is probably a good idea, but I'm not going to cry in my beer about it if it doesn't happen. The cross-ownership rule, I think, is okay. I mean, is one I think it's good that it's happening that way. I mean, you look at what's happening with the newspapers. I mean, we have a thriving newspaper town, and even those two are struggling in some ways. If you can partner, if you can have a cross-ownership with the Boston Globe and WGBH or something, you know, you get viability. It creates a viability. And also, Pai is right about the Internet. That reach has just broken up this whole mess. It's like we're living in the dark ages. You even look at some of those FCC rules about profanity. I mean, I was flipping around the other night, watching a baseball game, and then I went to some movie that was full nudity, and it was because it was on, you know, right. It was on a cable channel. They say these things are antiquated. So the fact that they're looking at some of these, or that's one that they ought to take another look at too, is probably a good thing. And I know some of it is because it's going to be favoring Sinclair, which is the conservative outlet. But
you know, still. I think it's important to note that when it comes to these rules possibly benefiting Sinclair, this could sound, as we have this discussion, like it's some sort of a liberal conservative discussion. I don't think it really is. Chris Ruddy, the head of Newsmax, which is very conservative, wrote, I thought, of quite good op-ed in the Washington Post in which he said that this is going to create homogenized news content around the country. He likes more diverse perspectives that were fostered by the existing FCC rules, and he has warned that if a station doesn't have to have a studio in a given community, the content is going to be created for them in New York or Washington and then shipped out. Say it again?
That already happens.
But it doesn't happen at WBZ or WHDH or WZ. Not in the same... Not in the same way, though. I think it's very, very different. I used to work at Community Newspaper Company, which is now Wicked Local, and I worked there at a time when they were pulling all these neighborhood papers, quote-unquote neighborhood papers, into a mothership in an office park in Danvers. And there is a fundamental loss of local responsiveness that you get if you pull the operations that are supposed to be covering a particular area into another place which is far from the people they're supposed to be writing about or, producing video or radio about. I did have a sharp...
No, I had a negative reaction to that one, too.
On the studio role, like you, I thought that it was already happening. Yeah. I mean, there was one several years ago, at least maybe 5 to 10 years ago, there was a station, I believe in North Carolina, or a group of stations based out of North Carolina, and they had, it was like a hub and spoke, so they had their anchors who would then feed out to whatever market it was where the state, and maybe they would have a freelance reporter going around getting one story on the ground, but there was really only one central studio, and they had ownership in signals in all these different markets. So I was surprised. I thought that that was something that was dropped a long time ago. I do have some concerns. I mean, if you have someone who is, doesn't have an operation in a market, there's less connection to it, I think, in general. And I think that's kind of what people want to know, that you are, and whether it may be real or not, you want to feel a connection to your station. And I think this will make everything feel as if it's a network as opposed to a local station.
Well, I think this is bad news all around, and I really don't know why Ajit Pai wants to dismantle every single rule that guarantees some localism, some diversity of ownership, and values like that the FCC was created to defend. The only thing that I can see about this that any good will come out of it is that we are in the dying years of the broadcast business. Everything
present company accepted,
except for public television. And everything is moving to the Internet, including public television. And so therefore, these rules are increasingly becoming anachronistic, and they're not really going to matter that much. But at this point, a lot of people still get their programming from broadcasters, and this does not serve them well.
Yeah, I thought you made a great point, Emily, about the cross-ownership rule. I mean, would the Herald be in better shape now if Rupert Murdoch still owned it? Sure. I think a case could be made that it would be. But the bottom line is, Dan, you can't force the marketplace to want local news. If they do want it, any effort by Sinclair or anybody else to come in here and force some out-of-town, particularly here, where we hate outsiders, right? They try to force some homogenous thing cooked up in another state down our throats, they're going to get it thrown up right back in their faces. On the other hand, if we saw the Patch localized news sites, that went, for the most part, belly up, right? Or it's been struggling. Right. Let me put it that way. If people want it, they'll want it. If they don't, they won't.
I don't know. Yeah, I would just briefly disagree. I think you can force the market. I mean, that's what these rules did, and that's why their repeal is a big deal. If left to its own devices, you can't make the market do anything. But these rules, I thought, took care of that for a long, long time.